Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. So, are you performing all required vendor validations to avoid non-compliance fines and penalties? If you don't know, make sure you listen to this episode to identify non-compliance risks and get vendor validation recommendations for regulatory watch lists and electronic payment compliance. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 331, Vendor Validations Recommended for Compliance. Now, I have to say this is actually a webinar. It's an on-demand webinar that you're going to be listening to, and the full name is Vendor Validations Recommended for Compliance, Manual versus Automated, and it was sponsored by a company called Faluda, and the last part of this webinar, they actually do a demo. And so if you are interested in seeing that video of that webinar, the on-demand recording, I do have a link to it in the show notes. There you can also download a PDF of the presentation as well. And I think Faluda had they also had like a brochure or something that you can download. So make sure you check out the show notes to get to the links so that you can either watch it or download the applicable handouts. And I thought I had one more on there too. It was the present. Oh, I had on there the vendor validation reference list with links for 28 resources. So you'll hear me talk about that in the webinar. And so you can download that right off of the on-demand recording platform. Now, I will let you know you do have to register in order to watch on the Vendor Process Training Center in order to watch the webinar, but it's free. Now, a little bit about it. Again, I always ask the question. Actually, people always ask me this question is, what validation should they be doing? And so I asked, as a part of this, summary, are you performing all required vendor validations, right, to avoid non-compliance fines and penalties? And so we all know that not only are vendor validations critical to avoid fraud, but they're also critical to avoid fines and penalties that you can get just from inaccurate vendor data. From paying vendors that are on watch lists. You can't just check, when you onboard them because, vendors can be added subsequent to when you onboard them and check them last. Those watch lists are not static. And then also there's also critical to keep you from making vendor payments with inaccurate remittance details. A great example of that is bank routing numbers, right? Banks merge, get acquired, and a couple years back we saw they fail, right? But they do that all the time, and vendors never tell you when those routing numbers change or uh, um, bit codes, right? If they're non-US and they don't have an IBAN. And so those IBANs can change too, because within the long IBAN numbers are the bank branch details, right? So you do need to make sure, right, that you are continuously checking those things and that you are checking them. So a couple of them you might see may not be on your current list, but you might need to add it. So make sure you listen to not only the webinar here, but if you want to get the PDF of the presentation, it does include the links for the downloads for the recommended validations. But again, I also have the vendor validation reference list with links for 28 resources that you can use to identify and get resources for doing those validations. Now, again, at the end, or the second half, you'll see a demo of the vendor compliance monitor from Faluda AI, who is the sponsor for this webinar. And that tool can automate the validation process, again, so you can avoid compliance fines by performing validations at once and anytime. You don't have to go to separate resources. I mean, it's great to know the resources that you need to go to and perform those validations manually. But at some point, you might want to make sure that you're using your time efficiently and you have a tool to do that, which is their vendor compliance monitor. Now, the immediate takeaways, this is where I identify exactly what you're going to see. So I have 6 non-compliance risks resulting from incomplete vendor validations. I also have 4 recommended vendor validations for regulatory compliance. I have 5 recommended vendor validations for watchlist compliance. And then I have 4 recommended vendor validations for electronic payment compliance. And that's your wires and ACHs. Now, if you are still unsure after listening to this podcast episode or watching the on-demand recording of this webinar, then you can always get customized vendor validations. I have a service where I provide that. I ask you for minimal information from your vendor master file. Really, I'm looking for US versus non-US vendors, seeing what countries they're in, if you have non-US vendors, and a couple other factors. And then I tell you exactly what what validations your organization should be performing. And so if you're interested in a customized vendor validation session, I have a link to that in the show notes. All right, so next, here is the webinar.
All right, so we are right at the top of the hour, and we're going to go ahead and get started with today's accredited webinar. So welcome to this compliance webinar, vendor validations recommended for compliance. We're going to be talking about manual process versus the automated process, but we're going to give you some vendor validations that we think you should be doing for compliance, and even give you some resources for those, both automated and manual. Now, this webinar is sponsored by Faluda AI, and Michael Youngblood is here from Faluda AI and to talk to us today. And I am Debra R. Richardson, and we'll both have a brief bio in a couple of slides. But first, I wanted to just talk about some quick housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded. We will send you a link to register for the recording within 24 hours. So if you'd like to watch it again, you can, or if you would like to share it with any of your colleagues that you think would find this information valuable, please do that as well. Now, you can submit your questions anytime. They will definitely be be answered, as many as we can, during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but we will try to answer some of those as we go if they're relevant for the slide that we're on. So make sure you submit your questions as you think of them. Now, lastly, make sure you download the handouts. I do have three, or we do have three today. Of course, we have a PDF of the presentation. We also have a handout from Faluda AI, and then we also have a vendor validations reference list. So the manual validations I talk about, you'll have a PDF that you can use. And I don't see the Faluda AI PDF, but I am going to drag that over there and you'll be able to download that handout before you leave this webinar today. Now, for those of you that are interested in earning CEUs or CPEs, by attending this session, you can earn 1 continuing education credit if you have an accounts payable or procure to pay certification through IOFM. And then also, if you are a certified fraud examiner, a CFE, you can earn 1 CPE through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. But to receive this credit, the following items must be completed. Each person wishing to receive CPE or CPE credit must log into the session individually with your own credentials. You must also answer all the polling questions throughout the presentation. There are 3. And then you must be in attendance for the entire live session. The certificates of attendance will be emailed within 48 hours. All right, and then really briefly for introductions, I am Debra R. Richardson. You might have heard of me by my saying, putting the AP in happy. I have a site dedicated to improving your vendor process, and as a certified fraud examiner, I work with AP vendor teams to add authentication techniques, internal controls, best practices, and vendor validations to their process to avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. And now I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Debra. So I'm Michael Youngblood. I am a principal scientist at Faluda AI. So I have worked in AI research and development for the past 25 years, and my specialty is interactive AI. So that's AI that works with people, not to replace them, but to augment them. So the way I think about it and the way I say what I do is I work on technologies that help turn regular everyday humans into superhumans. Thanks.
Wow, love that. Thanks, Michael. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda for today. So first, Michael will demo an automated system for improved vendor validation process for compliance. And then I'll talk about the risk from non-compliance with those vendor validations. And then since we know it may take time to get approval for an automated process, we'll show you what recommended validations there are for compliance, how you can do it manually, right? Again, in the meantime, until you can get approval for that automated process. And then hopefully we'll have up to 10 minutes for questions, and we will answer all that we can in that time frame. But before we get to all of that, we do have our first poll question. And so I'm going to go ahead and I will launch that. And then if everyone could go ahead and answer. So the first poll question is, do you use any tools to help with vendor validation? So it's a real easy one. Just click yes, just click no. And then I'll probably give about 30 seconds for one to get at least most folks to respond. So go ahead and answer. Do you use any tools to help with vendor validations? Yes or no. And for those of you that said yes, if you would like, you can put the tool or the tools, plural, into the chat that you use. So go ahead and do that. And it looks like we're getting up there with most people voting. So I'll give that about 10 more seconds. And then we will take a look at the results. All right, and One last time, if you haven't voted, go ahead and select yes or no in response to the poll question. Do you have any tools to help with vendor validation? All right, so it looks like we've got most people to vote. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll question, and let's take a look at the results. So it looks like, here we go, went and came back. It's back now. So it looks like the 57% said yes, and then 43% said no. And so let's go ahead and hide that, and we will go back to the presentation. Here we are. And so now we're going to get started, Michael, right, with improved vendor validation process for compliance. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass presenter rights over to you, and then they should be coming up, and you should be able to share your screen.
Right window.
There we go.
Okay, see it, you should see a slide.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So a little bit about Fluda AI. So Fluda AI is a startup. It's a little over 2 years old, but well-funded, so it's going to be around for well into the future. And a little background, about a year and a half ago, we were approached by Houston Independent School District to help automate some of their compliance checks. So in general, what Fluda AI does is we apply composite AI solutions to people's problems. And so you've heard lots about different types of AI, and composite AI is that not every technique fits everybody, but sometimes combinations of techniques or a composite of those techniques help people. And so this is an early stage product called Vendor Compliance Monitor that I'm going to give a demo of. But this little tagline in the middle, I think is important to think about right now, that we'll work with you to create a custom automated vendor compliance monitoring solution that best serves your needs. So being a startup and creating a new product, the advantage is that you have our engineers at your disposal to help automate your particular workflows and compliance needs down. What it will look like is this little graph on the bottom where an ISD, and we primarily have been working with ISDs lately, but any organization that has federal state funding or compliance requirements that needs to check their vendor lists to make sure they're compliant, then all you have to do is share that list with us, and you may also share your report requirements. So if you have a particular set of checks you want to do, or the output format that you want, you supply those, and then we bring them into the vendor compliance monitor and produce a vendor compliance report at the frequency that you need. So let's jump right in. The tab just so you now should see the software itself. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, sorry, it doesn't show the screen to me when I'm showing it. So let's just walk through some of the basics of the actual product. And so you can take your vendor list. In this case, we have just canned demo vendor lists, and it'll give you a snapshot of like how many compliant vendors you have and how many uncompliant vendors you have. And then you can create many things. You can create a compliance report, which is what you're primarily interested in. And so you can select all of them or none of them or a subset of them. If none of them, you don't get a report. And then you can actually create a PDF report, and that PDF report will look like this. And so it will tell you, it'll go through each of your vendors and tell you which ones are compliant and not compliant and why they're compliant or not compliant, and they have a particular set of checks they run against. So this is the set of checks that Houston Independent School District likes to run. So you see SAM. SAM is a roll-up of if you have a entity that is allowed to do work for the federal government, then they've already had their TIN and TS and name and everything else validated, but they also have exclusion lists. So we look at those exclusion lists, and so these are people that if you're able to work for the federal government, then you're able to do lots of things. So it has a number of the checks that will go into in the future rolled up into it. But in particular for Texas, there's some interest in the franchise tax, the delinquent property tax, if they're on the Texas debar list or the divestment statute lists for the state of Texas. You know, so these are all Texas specific. And so we run through those checks. And so we'll give you an example of what it looks like to run through these checks. So you get the status and kind of a matrix here that tells you what checks they failed, how many of them were passed, how many of them failed. And then we dig into each particular vendor We can show you why they're compliant and where they're not compliant. And of interest here, and let me just pick out this one, is that this does a match kind of like humans do, where you can set it to do an exact match, but humans, we can make adjustments. Like if there's, in this case, if we look at this vendor who was on the Texas debarred list, their street address actually has pipes in it, these little up and down segments. And so that can throw a lot of systems off. But with a fuzzy match system, like a human, we can see through that. We'll tell you that it's a fuzzy match, but we also believe that this is a strong indication that this is who we're talking about, because we matched on their name. And if you look at others, it will tell you like it matches on their name and their tax ID. And in this case, their actual address is at zip code of 76001, but someone had mistyped 75201 into the franchise tax status. So it can intelligently match these even when they're not exact, and you can adjust that so you can do more of a human type of decision making about what is close and what's not close. So that's how we do compliance. We can run that report as often as you like. You can manually run it. We also can help with data quality. So in all those reports and all that fuzzy matching goes on, this is kind of a compliant, how good the match and the stats are for each of those checks. And we can produce a report, and I'll just kind of skim through this real quick, where we give you all the details about what we checked, how we checked, and how the different edits looked to the machine. So if you want to go through and really understand what matched and what didn't match, you can go through that list. That list can be used to clean your own list. It shows you exactly where your databases have discrepancies with other databases you're checking against. And nobody has clean databases, and cleaning is a large job in itself. And so this can really help with that. And the last, you can look at the list of reports, of who pulled reports, all reports, even the automated generated reports. You can look at any one of those reports if just a subgroup were pulled and validated, and you can look over time to see how that may have changed over time. And so you have full access, and that way you don't have to necessarily regenerate reports. You can just go pull it here, or it can you can be notified when a report's available with a secure link. So that's the vendor compliance monitor. So just to reiterate some of the key features, it has AI-based fuzzy match of the data so that it can deal with noisy or unclean data, and you can tune that. So if you really want exact match, you can say no tolerance, just make it an exact match. If you wanted to kind of look at it from 30,000 feet, you can adjust that as well. We give you tools to help improve your data quality, which identify the differences between the databases and your own database that you can use to clean your database. And we can run these checks nightly, weekly, monthly, any periodicity you want. You can just make it manual. You can go in and select and generate that report. And so, and then it can be securely delivered to you or downloaded as you need it when you want it. So just to reiterate, this is just a preview of our vendor compliance monitor, and we're looking forward to working with any of you that wants to automate your compliance monitoring flow. All right, thanks, Debra. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me go ahead and I will get that screen back up, bring the presentation back up, and we will get started. All right, so you should be able to see my screen now. Yes. So I did want to say, Michael, that while you were going through your demo, I did upload the Faluda AI vendor compliance monitoring or monitor handout. So make sure that those of you that are attending live, make sure that you download that from the handout section because it is now available. All right, so let's go ahead and keep going. Now, the next thing we have is a second poll question. And so let me go ahead and launch that. And again, I'll probably give this about 30 seconds or so for everyone to answer. But the second poll question is, when are you performing vendor validations? Is it only at vendor setup? Is it at vendor setup and when cleaning your vendor master file? And I know that's a tall order because cleaning your vendor master file, at least manually, is can be a big or significant effort. But if you are doing doing your validations at vendor setup and cleaning the vendor master file, go ahead and select that. Or maybe you're already using a continuous monitoring validation software. If so, select that response, or you're just unsure. So again, probably go maybe another 10 or 15 seconds for everyone to vote. We have pretty much everyone, most of you have voted already, but if you haven't, you've got about 10 more seconds. So go ahead and make sure you vote. Still collecting responses. Thanks, everyone. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close that. And let me share the results. So 59% of you say that you only do it at vendor setup. The next highest, 29%, is at vendor setup and when cleaning the vendor master file. And then 12% are unsure. And then we didn't have anyone that selected that you use some type of validation software or continuous monitoring. All right, so thanks everyone for participating in that poll, and I'm going to go ahead and hide the results. And let's get back to the webinar presentation, because now we're going to talk about risks from non-compliance with vendor validations. And so what I have identified, and there's probably many more, but there are 6 significant risks to not doing or performing those vendor validations for compliance. And the first one is synthetic vendors. Now, fraudsters are creating synthetic identities for vendors now, and they actually used to just kind of regulate that to consumers, but it's not just consumers anymore. They are creating these synthetic identities and trying to get set up in your vendor master file so that they can send a fake invoice and get a payment. So checking to verify the vendor is real will help to avoid setting up those synthetic vendors and making a fraudulent payment. Now, the next compliance risk, we all know the IRS fines and penalties, right? Submitting a bad legal name and tax ID combination for 1099 reporting can result in both fines and penalties from the IRS. Plus, it can also result in some manual work for you too, because now the IRS is going to let you know, and you're going to go have to go out there and collect a W-9 from all of those vendors. In addition, right, to the fines and penalties, you've got some manual rework to do. Now, the next one is OFAC and other watch list fines and penalties. And really, if you think about it, bigger than the IRS fines and penalties, they certainly can be much higher, are penalties for OFAC and other watch lists. And OFAC, for example, can give you fines for both, can fine you both for civil and criminal penalties that can be up there in the millions of dollars. And so you want to make sure you're always compliant with OFAC and other watch list requirements. And then next is just stale or bad vendor data. You know, you may have checked them at vendor setup, and at based on the last poll, 59% of you say that you only check them at vendor setup. But the problem is what if a vendor was subsequently added to a watch list, or they changed their legal name or tax ID and didn't let you know? So a lot of times vendors won't let us know things, especially if it doesn't really affect their payments. If it affects their payments, they might let you know. But sometimes that's triggered because they have made a change to their legal name and tax ID, and they just didn't know that you needed to know that. So you have to make sure that you are checking for those types of changes on a regular, if not continuous basis. And then the next one is NACHA violation. So NACHA, if you weren't aware, is the organization that governs the ACH, the US ACH network, and it provides its operating rules. So violations to those rules can be reported by banks if your, let's say your ACH pay file includes outdated bank branch routing numbers, for example, because banks merge and are acquired all the time. And when they do that, the routing number changes, but your vendors typically don't tell you that. So when you go to make that payment, you include the old routing numbers. And some banks will change it for you, especially if their account number didn't change and it's the same bank, right? They'll change it for you so the payment's going to be successful, but they're not going to do that forever. Eventually, right, when they change it, they're going to notify you. And if you don't make that change and they keep having to make that change in order for the payment to be successful, they're going to, one, return the payment. So now you got rework done on that. And two, they're going to report a violation to NACHA, which can mean that you will incur fines from NACHA. Now, the last one is return payments and tax reporting documents. So that is a risk that now you'll have IRS fines and penalties because your tax documents did not reach the vendor in time, let's say because the address was incorrect, because the IRS does issue fines and penalties based on the recipient, the vendor, not receiving the 1099 by the required deadline. And so, and if that vendor had a change that, they would have reported to you, and you have to make a correction when you file that correction, then you're going to pay fines and penalties on that as well. But if you get it to them in a timely fashion, if there's anything wrong, and there's always something when the vendors call in that might need to be changed, then you would be able to change it in a more efficient time period, so you don't incur IRS fines and penalties, or you don't start moving up that penalty chart. And so what makes it harder to comply, though, is really those staff shortages and increased compliance requirements, not to mention, right, the compliance requirements can change. And so if you do not have an automated process for vendor validations, right, this can be right, that manual process, but it can be done. And so we're going to look at today some recommended validations for compliance that you can do manually, and also give you some resources for those as well. So now let's talk about the recommended validations for compliance. And I've really broken this down into 3 types of compliance. One is vendor data compliance, 2 is watch list compliance, and then 3 is electronic payments compliance. So let's start with vendor data compliance. And I'm going to start with the one that we should all know, but I tell you, I still run into accounts payable teams, procurement teams, whoever has management over the vendor master file, and they are still not doing the IRS 10 match at vendor setup, and some are just not doing it at all. But the reason that you want to do this IRS 10 match is because, one, you want to make sure the vendor is registered with the IRS using the legal name and tax ID that they gave you. And then also you want to just make sure the vendor is not fraudulent. And so making sure, again, that the legal name tax ID matches IRS records will help you to avoid fines and penalties. And again, that additional rework that can come with collecting a new W-9 from vendors when the IRS let you know that you filed a mismatch of vendor data. And so where would you get this information from? Where you get it from the IRS W-9 or the IRS W-8 if you're talking 1042s. And then how to validate. The IRS does provide a free resource for doing the 10 match, and the link is there. Now, if you do not currently have an account, registration is required first by your principal, and then anyone at your company that would like to perform the 10 match on behalf of your company would have to register as well. And usually the turnaround time is 2 to 3 weeks. Now, another validation tool from the IRS that you may or may not have heard of is the IRS Records for Tax Exempt Organization Search, or TOs. No registration is required for that, but what this does is if you have a tax exempt organization or a charity, right, you want to make sure you're not paying a fake charity. You want to make sure the information is valid. You can also check the tax deductibility status. And so this really confirms whether the vendor is registered for tax exempt status, which again can protect against the request to set up a fraudulent charitable organization. But then it can also identify, if the types of payments that your company is making to, let's say, a charity is tax deductible or not. You would get this information from the IRS Form W-9. And again, there is a tool that the IRS has that you can look up, where you can look up these tax exempt organizations. And so one thing I did want to say about this one is it actually has an additional benefit that you might not even think about if you've used it before. But when you search for vendors for charities or any tax exempt organization, you can search by name, but you can also search by tax ID. So you can search by either one. So let's say if you're cleaning your vendor master file and you're missing a tax ID, you can put the name of the charitable organization or tax exempt organization and then click search. And if it is registered with the IRS, if it's valid, right, it's going to pull that organization up. But when it pulls the organization up, you can verify it's the correct one using the street address, but it will also give you the tax ID. So that's one little tip in using this IRS tool for tax exempt organizations that can help you clean your vendor master file. All right, and then the next one is the vendor unique entity identifier. So this is really on the system of award management, and it is a relatively new number that that SAM is using. They used to use the DUNS number, but now they use the vendor unique entity identifier. And if you are a federal, a U.S. government entity, or you receive federal funding, you can go on to SAM. Your vendor should be registered there, and you can collect that vendor unique identifier, entity identifier number, and then you can just verify, right, that the vendor is real. And so you would get that number from any vendor setup document that you had when you that you may have when you collect the IRS W-9 or W-8. You can also look them up, I believe, by the tax ID that you would get from those forms as well. And then if you do that, you should be able to find their unique entity identifier. Either way, if they come up, you know that they are a real vendor and not a synthetic vendor identity. Now, that is a free direct search through the system of award management. And then the next one is the vendor address. And this is both US and international. And you just want to make sure, again, that the vendors are not fraudulent using addresses that do not exist. And so you also, when you're doing this process, will standardize and format the addresses so that they are mailable, because you definitely don't want any check payments that you send coming back, and you don't want any 1099s or 1042s that you distribute to your vendors coming back as well, causing rework for you and your team. And so you would get the vendor's address from the IRS W-9, W-8 forms, maybe from their invoice, right? Or maybe from a fully executed contract. And so I have added links here for the United States Postal Service, so you can do a lookup. Also, they have publication 12 12, publication 28, that will have other addressing standards that include abbreviations for like drive, road, and some other information. They also have, by the way, labels that have a format for non-US addresses. I think they have one for Canada, they have one for Germany, and then they have one more, but each of those three is supposed to represent all of the countries that are out there. And if it's a separate one, like Canada, it's just for Canada. But I think Germany is out there, and that format should be applicable to most other countries. But you can check that out in publication 28. I did give you a link to that. And then I also gave you a link to the Universal Postal Union, the UPU, which is equivalent to the United States Postal Service, but it's for non-US countries. And what this is you can click on this link, you'll scroll down to the middle of the page, and you will identify what country you want to see the mailing standards for, and then it'll give you 1, 2, some have 3 pages of a PDF where you can, where it shows you what that label or what that address standardization needs to look like. And then I also included Google Earth, and you might think, well, why would you want to include Google Earth? Well, if you are suspicious about an address, then, and you maybe can't find it using other tools like the USPS lookup tool, you can try Google Earth. And I will tell you that as a practitioner, we did this when we were suspicious about vendor addresses. And one time we did have an address pull up as a parking lot that was next to a liquor store. So you could probably guess we actually did not set that vendor up. So Google Earth can be great to use if you are suspicious about a specific address. So that's it with the vendor data. So we did have a question come in, and this question was, how often do vendors have information that changes? So that's probably applicable to all. Michael, I don't know if you've had any experience with how often they have information that changes?
So it varies by the types of vendors, but you can expect over the course of every quarter that, depending on how big your database is, maybe 1 or 2% may change, maybe more, depending on volatile. And like you mentioned, there are some things like transition from LLC to Inc. can be a big one that the vendors change, but all their numbers change. It depends how they do that transition.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. And and also what is true, and you could probably attest to this too, Michael, is that a lot of times, right, when they make those changes, they, again, don't always notify you unless it affects their payments, right? And even at that point, they may just give you the updated payment information and just kind of leave it to you to be stuck with the old like address or other information that also needs to be changed.
Yeah, I'll add that Google data itself, whether maps or Earth, can sometimes be wrong. And so a good way to balance that is to look at like OpenStreetMaps are don't just use one maps vendor, right, but look at multiple. And this is sometimes where automation can help, because if you have to look across multiple, it really makes it take a lot more time. But OpenStreetMaps is publicly curated, so it does tend to have it has lots of gaps in its data, but people are volunteering and they're kind of putting all their own neighborhood data in there. So when it has data, it's actually really good, but but it can have bigger gaps in it. So there is no perfect database out there, unfortunately.
Right. All right, so thanks for that question. That was actually really good, because we do know vendors have information that changes. All right, so now let's take a look at watch list compliance. And so the first one, of course, we're going to talk about the United States Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control, or OFAC. And the reason that you want to validate, right, is that the vendors that appear on this list should really not be set up in your vendor master file. If there is a vendor match, you really need to notify your leadership for further action. And so the way that you would check is using your vendor legal name that you can get from their IRS W-9 or W-8. And then you also maybe can get it from other documents as well. And that is I did provide the link there for that sanction search through the OFAC website. And then the next one you may not have thought about, but it is the vendor bank name. And what I should say is the foreign vendor bank name. It's again through the Office of Foreign Asset and Control. And really OFAC's lists are not, it's not just one or two lists. It's really a set of, or two sets of consolidated lists. And one of those lists included is the capital list. And so foreign banks that appear on their list of foreign financial institutions subject to correspondent account or payable through account sanctions, which again is their capital list, should not be set up in your vendor master file. So just like you should not be paying vendors whose legal names show up on that list, you should not be sending payments to foreign financial institutions that show up on this capital list. And so you would get that information from the vendor letterhead, bank letter, voided check, or company branded ACH wire form, which I do recommend since bank letters and voided checks can be forged. And so same tool, same reference resource to search that as you're searching for the vendor legal name. So if you have maybe a foreign vendor with a foreign financial institution or a foreign bank, you'll go ahead and you'll search for the vendor's legal name, and then you'll clear it, and then you will search for the foreign bank's name as well. All right, the next one is the Excluded Parties List System, or EPLS. That's the vendor legal name. And this is if you are a U.S. government entity or you receive federal funding. So we're going back to sam.gov. And so governments and those receiving federal funding are really prohibited from awarding contracts to those vendors that are on this list. Now you can search by name, by unique entity identifier I was just talking about, case code, to verify the vendor is not on the list. One good thing about this one, though, is that if there is a match, yes, they do have their tax IDs in sam.gov, but if there is a match, you can enter in, if they gave you the social security number, or you can enter in their employer identification number to verify that that is your vendor that you actually found on that list. Now, you would get that information from the IRS W-9 or W-8 as far as their tax ID. If you have a vendor setup form, you can collect the unique identifier, entity identifier on that. And then that, again, is a free free search through sam.gov. All right, and then the next one is the vendor legal name and tax ID, and you're going to search those on the list of excluded individuals and entities, or LEIE. And so this is if you are a healthcare organization or you receive federal funding. And so the Office of Inspector General really has the authority to exclude individuals and entities from federally funded healthcare programs, right? Medicare, Medicaid. So again, you would search by name first, and if there is a match, you can then input the social security number or employer identification number just to verify that that is your vendor that that you had a match with. And so you would get that information from the W-9, legal name, tax ID, or W-8. And then there is a free resource through the Office of Inspector General their online searchable database, or you can actually download some data files as well. And they even have a quick tips for searching. And really what that quick tips tells you is how you can also put in their tax ID to verify it is them. All right, and then the last one for the watch list compliance is the vendor legal name. You'll search that on the denied persons list, DPL, and this is required if you are a U.S. government entity or receive federal funding. It's really good for all because vendors that appear on this list have had their export privileges denied by written order of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so you would get their vendor legal name from the IRS W-9, W-8 form, maybe a contract, any other document that you collect as part of the vendor process. And then you can do that search using either the direct search tool or you can download a list. Again, that's through the Bureau of Industry and Security. And then the last one is electronic payment compliance. So I talked about the notcha fines for, having bad bank branch data. And so you really do need to make sure that the routing numbers or the transfer money code for that country is correct for that bank branch. And for the U.S., many of you already know that some routing numbers are good for ACHs and wires, but other banks have a separate routing number for ACH and a separate routing number for wire. So if you're verifying the U.S. routing number, you need to verify that you have the right routing number for the right type of payment, and then also that routing number is valid. And you need to do the same thing with Canada, because Canada also uses routing numbers as well. And then if you have a CHIPS universal identifier, you can verify that using the clearinghouse. And so for U.S. routing numbers, you'll use the Federal Reserve Board. If you have a clearinghouse UID, there's a resource with the clearinghouse to look that money transfer code up. And then routing numbers in Canada, there's not really a tool to look up, but Payments Canada does have like a set of PDFs that are supposedly updated on a weekly basis. So you do have an option to download those PDFs and then verify those money transfer codes or routing numbers for US and Canada are valid. And then the next one is for international countries, but this would be for non-IBAN countries. You're going to verify that the business identifier code, or BIC, is valid. And then again, you will take that from the vendor letterhead, bank letter, company branded ACH form. Same thing for US and Canada too. I don't think I said it on the last slide, but you want to get that information and you want to validate it. And for the BIC, for the BIC, there is an online tool using Swift that you can go in and verify that the BIC code is valid and that it matches your vendor's bank. And then for IBAN countries, you do want to validate the vendor bank and international bank account number, or IBAN, that it is the right format. And so you want to make sure that your payments are successful and that the IBAN is valid for that bank branch. Now, the IBAN countries are EU countries plus Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Hungary. And then also, we're same as with the BIC code, you'll go to the Swift site. There is a link here that takes you directly to the PDFs for the IBAN formats by country. Now, what I do want to remind you to make sure you download the handout. It is a PDF, but is the vendor validation reference list. It has all of the links that I talked about on the previous slides, plus a few more. And those resource links or references for doing those validations are separated or categorized based on the form that you would get them on, such as the IRS W-8, W-9 form, or the bank form, the invoice, the email. So make sure you download that. And now we've come to the last poll question, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And that question is, what is your biggest concern for doing vendor compliance checks? So I know we talked about doing those manually, but also there is an option to automate that process as Michael went through. But for now, go ahead and just identify what your biggest concern is for doing vendor compliance checks. Is it time and resource constraints? Again, especially if you're doing it manually. Is it staying up to date with changing regulations? Is it knowing even really which compliance checks to perform, or unsure? Go ahead and select that. And we have about half voted, so I'll give about 10 more seconds, 10, 15 more seconds to get more people to have time to vote. So go ahead and if you haven't voted, do so now. And it looks like they're still coming in, but we're getting at least more than a little more than 70%. So go ahead and vote if you haven't. And I am going to go ahead and close the polls, and let's take a look at the results. And so let me go ahead and share that. All right, so it looks like 50% said time and resource constraints. 31% said staying up to date with changing regulations. And we all know if any of you send out 1099s, that one is a big one for the IRS for the past couple of years, because they came out with a new form, and then they came out with other additional requirements surrounding the 1099 and 1042 reporting, especially with the electronic requirements. So yes, staying up to date with changing regulations can be a big one too. And then 13% said unsure, but 6% said knowing which compliance checks to perform. So hopefully we helped you out with some of those compliance checks that you may need to perform at your company. All right, so let's go ahead and hide that. All right, so we do want hope you got some value out of today's webinar. It's not quite over yet. Michael, just want to know if you wanted to speak on Faluda as we wrap up today.
Yes, thank you. So again, we're available if you don't have an automation solution, and particularly if you find that automation solutions aren't working for you or don't fit into your workflow. It's a good opportunity to work with a startup company that can be very focused on you. You don't pay for the engineering, so that's on us, and we will help to put together a solution that works best for you, and then we work on a subscription model from that. Just not to scare anybody, but based on our experience looking at numerous various ISD vendor lists across Texas, it's amazing to find how many non-compliant vendors there are. And we find somewhere between 15 to 25% by checking. It's a little scary. And like Debra mentioned, there's lots of regulations come all the time. I even listed some more about if you have federal funding and the new EDGAR regulations that are coming out. But we can help automate your process to help you check your vendors as you need for your ISD or organization. And it's really easy to work with us. In fact, if you just give us our list, in fact, there's a QR code right here on the screen, and you'll see it in the slide deck when it gets shared with you. If you want to have a free audit check, we'll run HISD's list of 5 checks on your list and see how well you do. So you just provide that list to us, and within 2 or 3 days, we'll send you back a report like the one I showed you, and you can get a sense of where you're at. Or if you just want to talk to us, you can email us or check out our website. So and that 15 to 25%, I think that comes from that creep that we talked about before, where every couple months a few more changes happen, and then right now some big problem is that with the way the economy is, we're losing vendors, and so they kind of disappear, which is another problem. But we can help you with your list if you want to work with us, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I did want to say, I don't think I mentioned it before, but when you download the PDF of this presentation, all the links are clickable. You will be able to, scan the QR codes and get directly to that resource. So make sure you don't forget to download that PDF. Now, I did want to have a slide just on how you can connect with me. I have my email address and some other information here as well. I have a podcast, Vendor Master File Tip of the Week YouTube channel. So if you're interested in any of that, make sure you check those out. And then we do have about 9 minutes for questions, and I do see a couple. I do want to remind everyone that tomorrow, about this same time, you will get a link to the recording where you can rewatch the whole thing, rewatch some specific sections, and you'll be able to share it with any of your colleagues that you think would find this information helpful. Not only will you be able to watch the recording, but you will be able to, or anyone you send the link to, will be able to register, watch the recording, and then download the handouts. And again, tomorrow or within 48 hours, but it'll probably be tomorrow, those of you that are still on that answered all 3 of the polling questions will get certificates of attendance, and you can use those to self-report CEUs through IOFM or CPE through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So we do have some questions here. The first one is coming from Terry. Do you need to do an OFAC check for US-based suppliers as well as international? And I'll put my 2 cents in here. Yes, absolutely. According to the US Department of Treasury, US entities and individuals are prohibited from paying vendors that are on that any of the OFAC lists. And Michael, I'm correct on that, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, and not only that, but you also have to make sure that you're continuing to check them, because I don't remember what the percentage was, but there was a large percentage of attendees here today, right? Some of you are only doing it at vendor setup, and you check them at vendor setup, that's great, but these vendors can subsequently be added to these watch lists, and so it has to be a recurring validation. And so that's why automated is really important, because that does take up, right, the staff, and it is a manual process if you're doing it manually, and it does take up some time, but you have to keep checking them because they can subsequently be added to those lists. All right, and then another question is, how long should we give a vendor to cure bad information? So, Michael, you want to take this one? Maybe, right, if they do the vendor analysis, find out that the vendor has some bad information, what do you suggest as far as how long to give them to update it?
Yeah, I think it ultimately depends on what the violation is. If they're on any of the exclusion lists, you want to immediately
that's true.
Pull them out. The financial stuff, it really depends on the severity. So if they're on any kind of a watch list, as you mentioned, definitely pull that out. If it's an issue where it looks like it may be fraud, you definitely want to pull them out. And for most days, if it's some kind of minor issue with address or some other information that doesn't involve watch lists or payments, financial stuff, typically you give them 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, there was a follow-up to that I forgot to say, and the follow-up was, should we not use those vendors during that, curing time?
Yeah, definitely if they're on any of the watch lists. And the financial stuff, I think you do a great job of really highlighting the issue of synthetic vendors in fraud, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger concern. It typically happens in these cases where the economy is going through some patches and changes, and so we see a lot more fraud. And I had the opportunity to talk with some bankers just last week, and they said it's an amazing amount of fraud that's out there right now.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about that too is when I was a practitioner and we would, of course, manually have to clean our vendor master file, right? We would find that some of the vendors would fail validations, not necessarily on the OFAC list, but maybe IRS 10 match, or, maybe no one did the address validation and standardization, and we find out it's an incorrect address, or maybe the check came back. And so what we would do is we would, again, identify what's the harm. Is it a red flag for fraud? But if it wasn't, right, we would send the vendor a notification and let them know we need a new W-9, or we need a new vendor setup form completed. And depending on what that was, sometimes we would not use that vendor during the curing time, because let's say we sent a ACH payment or a check payment and it returned. We're not going to send another one, right, until we get that corrected information. And so I think as you talked about, it really depends on what the issues are, but definitely stay on that vendor until they give you updated information. And you may need to stop using them, put a payment block or something if the information you're trying to update relates to payments. All right, so that's the last question that I see. So I do want to just remind everyone that tomorrow at the same time, you are going to get a link to register to watch the recording, to download the handouts, and feel free to share that with anyone you think will find this information valuable. Those of you that want CEU or CPE credit, actually everyone's going to get a certificate of attendance, but look for it if you want that CEU, CPE credit so that you can self-report. And then if you have questions, think of questions afterwards, you can reach out to info@debrarrichardson.com. If you have questions directly related to the vendor compliance monitor, feel free to reach out to Faluda at info@faluda.ai. So thanks, Michael, for coming on and showing us how automation looks like in the vendor compliance space.
Thank you, Debra. Thank you for your expertise.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we're going to go ahead and conclude this webinar, but I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Bye, guys.
All right, so that is the webinar. Again, if you would like to either watch the on-demand recording, the video of it, or download the handouts, make sure you go to the show notes and click on the on-demand webinar, and you can do both. Also, if you would like a customized vendor validation session, there's also a link in there or in the show notes for that service as well. All right, so thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 331st episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.